So tell me, folks, do you know what a Rosenwald school is? Well, if not, you will tonight. Why, might you ask? Because in the community we will be discussing today, there was once a Rosenwald school. Furthermore, the Coakley vicinity, it is home to one of Edgecombe County's oldest houses. Coakley, it is quite a mysterious place, given not a lot is known about its history. But for starters, why don't we start with the Coakley name? This here, it shows a bit of history regarding the Coakley name. It is also connected with the Mayo name, which will come in handy soon in discussing a farm. Granted, I did not spend the time doing deed research on this one, but notice at the bottom about having acquired many parcels of farmland in Edgecombe and Martin counties. Well, Martin County, it is just a few miles to the east of here. And so, there definitely is a connection somewhere with the community of Coakley and the Coakley family tree, especially given there is a farm in the vicinity that has been in the Mayo generation. The Mayo and Coakley families, they do appear to have had connections, but before we get into that farm, let's first discuss a mysterious house that might be among the county's oldest. The thing is, though, I am not sure we will be able to see it, at least without stepping onto the property, and it does appear to be presently occupied. Given this report is from 1985, I am not even sure if that old house is still standing, but in the far back of that complex over there, lying behind and beyond the main house, lies what is often referred to as the Edgecombe House. It is said to have, in fact, once been lying over there. Now, this entire complex, it is part of what has come to be called the Mayo Satterthwaite Farm, and very little appears to be known about its history prior to 1940. Interestingly, though, the complex of buildings at this site does illustrate three different house forms, and the Edgecombe House, the one reportedly in the far back, is the oldest building. In fact, it is quite possibly one of the county's oldest houses, with an estimated date of 1770 to 1790. It is only one of three in the county with a gambrel roof and a one-story rear shed. The facade has two windows around a central door with two bays above, but I have to say, I do not see it or even any remnants of it. Maybe it could be very well hidden, or maybe simply it no longer exists today in 2021. Regardless, we are going to talk about it anyway. You can just imagine. The front wall, it was said to have flush, wide board sheathing, and it was probably sheltered by a porch. Other walls are said to have had replacement weatherboards, but of course, I cannot really get over there to show you much or to even see if it is or not very well hidden. The dwelling's distance and tendency to be obscured by the other structures makes it almost impossible to get a decent view of that area. But in fact, as I have said before more than once, I cannot be certain if this house still exists. As far as the interior goes, which you likely would not be seeing anyway, The interior space, it was said to follow a hall and parlor plan. An enclosed stair was said to have risen from the parlor. And the parlor, it has a tall Georgian mantel with three raised panels. Flush, wide boards, situated above paneled wainscoting, are said to have covered the walls. But the 3-bay, 1.5-story house was said to have lost its chimneys, its front porch, and its interior finishes. Apparently, one room of the house, with its interior paneling, has, get a load of this, been installed in the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, a museum located in Old Salem. And that is said to include the raised panel wainscoting and an impressive raised panel mantel. So, if this house is gone today, there is apparently a section of it preserved in a museum nearly 200 miles away. However, I am not so sure about this. You see, the 1985 report from the architecture book, from where a lot of this information stems, talks about it being a part of the Mayo Satterthwaite Farm complex. Now, I am assuming this webpage from the museum to be talking about the room mentioned in that 1985 report. Now, here it mentions a Frederick Jones Sr., who is not mentioned in that 1985 report. Maybe this is a different piece, but I am tending to believe it is not. And if that is true, something seems a bit off here. Was Frederick Jones associated with the house prior to 1940? Maybe what was called murky has come to light many years later? Or maybe a mistake was made in the reporting? I tend to err on the side of more current information, but who knows? I mean, who was Frederick Jones Sr.? Satterthwaite still, to this day, does have interest in the property, as you will soon see. Furthermore, at the bottom of the report, this stands out. The museum page claims, pretty surely, as of 2018, that house still stands. Well, if what is in the museum is in fact from this house, as reported in 1985, then tell me, folks, where is that house? So, here is that Google Earth image once again. The house is set back. Yes, there is a house here, but forget about that. We will get into that one shortly, but where is this really old house? This building here is as far back as we can go, and that appears to be this, which does not appear to have a gambrel roof. So, was the house torn down? Was it converted into something else? Regardless, we are not done with this area just yet. Yes, we do have to move on. So, in the early to mid 19th century, a 2-story house was built on the property, and so the older house, it was moved further from the road. And this new house, its standard form, consists of a 2-story, 3-bay facade. It holds double-shouldered end chimneys and rear shed rooms. It has a hall and parlor plan with an enclosed stair. Windows of a 9/9 sash do flank the two end chimneys and the central front door. And once again, just to make sure you are not confused, we are talking about Not that old house, no, but the newer one, which is clearly visible these days. The doors are of a six-panel type, but things are not likely to all add up here. You see, the original form of the house, it has been heavily altered. It now holds a neo-colonial porch, aluminum siding, and sheetrock. Far more modern doors have also been added, and an enclosed porch and a flat-roofed carport can also be found. At its rear end, more recent documentation states that the porch is no longer there. But is that referring to an old but not a new porch? Furthermore, between the main dwelling and that so called Edgecombe house, another dwelling does stand. And yes, it also appears to be visible today. And it was built with heavy frame and half round joists. It displays a typical tenant house form with two rooms sharing a central chimney. The facade and the rear elevation, they have four bays laid out in what could be called a window, two window arrangement. The right half is said to retain its original batten doors. Again, this structure also tends to have a kind of a strange aura about it. The occupancy of that little house and its relationship between the farm's three houses is not known. Regardless, though, even today, as you can see, this area, it is highly conducive to farming. After all, this is ultra-rural Edgecombe County at its finest. Now, the outbuildings on the farm complex. They include a four-seater outhouse, but it is unfortunately no longer intact. Apparently, it has been converted into some kind of tool room. Wow. Outhouse into tool room. Nice. An early 20th century mule barn has a water trough hewn out of a large pine log. Modern feed tanks and a garage can also be found, completing the picture of this smaller than average farm. Of course, things may have changed since 1985. As you know, I cannot really get onto the property to give a thorough investigation. But the history of this farm, it is murky up until about 1940 when Lou Mayo Brown Moomaw was awarded in a division of land the tract containing this small farm complex. Later, James Henry Satterthwaite reassembled the divided tracts in the 1940s. The main house is now occupied, or at least it was as of 1985, by E. Powell Satterthwaite, the former postmaster of Tarboro. So let's just see what this farm holds as of today. According to the Edgecombe County GIS website, looking at the property here in 2021, we find it is associated with a deed dated to 2007. I am taking that to assume that the property today is still in the trust of Curtis E. Satterthwaite. And here are the details for that parcel. It says that there are 7 buildings on it. Now, yes, that's quite a bit. The one I am specifically interested in, though, is the oldest, that so called Edgecombe house. Here is the detail for the home site of the farm. Forget about the effective year built, we are simply interested in just the year built. It says 1860. Okay, not as old as the report for the Edgecombe house. Now, the others, the storage, grain bin, and carport, all date to either 1900 or 1901, so has the Edgecombe house been demolished, or is the home site that very house? You know, I don't know. I can't get on the property to find out. I suspect probably not, but before we move on to the Rosenwald School, there is this building, the Coakley Store building. Now, I wonder how old this little thing is. I mean, when could one have bought something in there? Could you buy something there today? I mean, it does look closed, but the sign beneath the gable on the facade, it talks about a yard sale. So, tell me, what is going on here? Let's see what we can find out. It appears the store is located on the parcel highlighted here on the Edgecombe GIS page. And that parcel, it is owned by a Collier Sue Satterthwaite. It does appear that the Satterthwaite clan owns lots of property here in the Coakley vicinity. Now, let's check the buildings on the parcel. Here, we have the building list. The last item says the old store, but that's all we have, folks. There is no other information. The year of the building? That is not discernible from this site. From a 1939 newspaper article, we do have this clipping, and it talks of a Coakley store in Coakley. There was a store here in the 1930s, apparently. Could that have been that building? Maybe, but not sure. And furthermore, we have a clipping from this ancient book, and it talks about Daily Mail and a railroad line in the area. That, however, may just be a tad bit misleading. There's this gazetteer website, Roadside Thoughts, and it says the Rand McNally Atlas shows that Coakley in 1895 had a post office and no railroad service. So, once upon a time, did that building serve as a little post office building? Coming back to the railroad, that old excerpt, it talked about the Hamilton Railroad. Well, the question there is, did that even exist? A website called Carolina has this to say. Nothing became of the Tarboro-Hamilton Railroad that, according to this ancient book, was supposed to have existed. So, tell me, I need to know. Can any light on those mysteries be shed? I don't know, but I have to move on. And before we do move on, let me first tell you what a Rosenwald school is. The term Rosenwald is named after Julius Rosenwald, who was once the president of Sears Roebuck. He, along with Booker T. Washington of the Tuskegee Institute, built state of the art schools for African American children across the South. Of course, state of the art schools here, referencing that period and not today. That effort, though, it has been called an important initiative to advance black education in the early 20th century. By 1928, one-third of the South's rural black schoolchildren and teachers were served by Rosenwald schools. Despite the historical significance of these schools, only a small percentage of Americans are familiar with the structures and their impact on our nation's history. While some of the schools are being preserved for community use, lack of resources and neglect does still threaten many others. There are a number of Rosenwald schools scattered throughout the South, and one of them happens to be right here in this rural farming community of Coakley. There is a certain kind of sensitivity to a building of this ilk. Therefore, such a structure, it should be treated with the utmost respect. That is, if you ever happen to come upon such a school, unless you do some research, likely you are not going to even know what you are looking at. Now, I have to say, before we go any further, this school, it is in especially poor condition. Even when detailed in the 1985 report, it has been said to be in extremely poor condition. Though, as of today, the school is probably far worse than what that report suggests. Today, it kind of looks like it has been bent in at the center, with the two halves shoved upward. Part of the school, as you will see, especially in the rear, does appear to almost be flattened. There are a lot of remnants of what used to be an intact building strewn across the woodland for a good many yards. Still, this building, it is visible from a number of homes, and I would not be surprised if it is being watched. I would not be surprised if someone is even keeping an eye on me. Still, if that is true, I have no idea if such people even know what the building is, though I suppose they probably do if living so close by. I mean, the building has, after all, caught the eye of preservationists wishing to preserve it somehow. I think, by the looks of this, a total reconstruction would be the only way to go. Maybe the center portion could be preserved, but that is just a small section of what, at one time, was a much larger building. Regardless of its state, it does remain a very important structure worthy of being recognized and, if possible, preserved. Yes, I am going to discuss its architecture as best as I can. Keep in mind that this is going to be a mess. I am not going to be looking for details in the rubble unless such details are apparent. For example, I am not going to be trying to locate what was once this room or that wall or whatever. It is what it is. So let's get on with this. What we have here, believe it or not, was a school that was built with the grant provided by the Rosenwald Fund during its 1924 to 25 budget year. According to the fund, the school's total costs was $3,360. The fund provided $700. Black citizens $660. White citizens $200, and public funds $1,800. So, what was the $700 for? It does list black, white, and public funds, but the $700 was for what? Construction, maybe? I don't know. Regardless, Coakley, it was built as a two-teacher type alternate plan number 20A school. You want to know what is exactly meant by a number 20A school? Well, it was simply a technical term for a type of two-teacher school. Here is a floor plan of one, if you are wondering. Anyhow, this school, it never received any additions and appears to have never been altered. It is likely located on its original site. The school is a frame structure raised on brick piers and sided with weatherboards. Exposed rafter ends do edge its seam metal gable end roof. Beaded boards do cover its interior walls and roofs, and its floors are of wooden boards. However, water infiltration through the roof has heavily damaged the wall between the south classroom and its cloakroom, as well as adjacent portions of the roof. Beneath the window bank of the north classroom, the weatherboards have either fallen or have been pulled away. So you want to know what a cloakroom is? Well, it is also known as a coat room, and it is nothing more than a place for people to hang their coats. Today, though, you probably just throw them on the floor in a pile. Isn't that what kids do these days? I don't know. I'm too old to know. But the school's two side-by-side classrooms face east. The northern classroom is the closest to the road. It has a pair of 9/9 sash windows at its north end that provided light to its cloakroom. One cloakroom in the gable is characteristic of that plan, that 28 type. Furthermore, its bank of six 9/9 sash windows has been boarded over on the outside. Inside, though, 5 of the 6 windows do remain in place. And folks, keep in mind that this report, it does date back to 1985. So yes, some stuff is probably not going to be as clearly visible in the rubble these days. But what happened to the 6th, might you ask? Well, here's what. A partially detached shutter takes the place of the 6th, and little of the interior of the classroom is visible anymore. Simply put, it is largely filled with moldering hay. Moldering hay? Okay, we do kind of need to see if that still holds true. You tell me, folks. Do you see any hay inside there? Let's now move on to the southern classroom. In that classroom, it is accessible through a recessed entry topped by a 3-light transom, lacking any glass. To one side of the entry stands the industrial room. A small cloakroom stands to the other. The floor of the classroom, it is largely covered with hay. However, the room, it is said to retain almost all of its 9/9 sash at its bank of windows. Only one of these bays is exposed on the outside. And at the south end of the room are, notably, the original narrow raised stage and also the ghost of the blackboard. Wow. So, this school is haunted by the ghost of a blackboard. If I come here at night, does that mean I might be startled by the sound of faint nails scratching the chalkboard? Oh man, that gives me the willies just thinking about it. So let us move on now to the common wall end of that southern classroom. There, an insert of upright beaded boards does fill the partition above the level of the original sliding blackboard. Wow! It was a sliding blackboard. No wonder it haunts this place. I would too, if I was a slider. Anyhow, the door between the two classrooms is gone. Okay then, someone must tell me. Who has it? Moving on now to the flue stack. The brick of that thing that the two rooms once shared has been boxed in with boards and partially exposed. Its stack, though, is visible above the roof. And the industrial room, that does project at the west end of the building. An original 5-panel door does lead to its south end. And that door, its remains, likely buried somewhere in this rubble, is said to have been topped by a 3-light transom with an absence of glass. Furthermore, the facing entryway lacks its door and any transom glass. For 3 of the rooms, 4 9/9 sash windows are in place. They are, however, hidden from the outside by sheet metal. Now, like I said, yes, you do have to imagine. 'Cause, you know, there is lots of stuff strewn around and loads of repairs to be done. Overall, as said earlier, the school is in very poor condition. Well, I think maybe even worse than that today. However, in terms of the National Register of Historic Places, it is said to have been intact enough. These days, though, I hate to say it, I'm not sure that is true. At one time, it was said to still retain its form, its banks of windows, its partitions, and most of its materials. Trees do hem it in, but at least at present do not rise through its floor. It is apparently on its original site, standing in a setting that remains rural, and it is therefore recommended as being eligible for the National Register. So folks, tell me, what do you think? Can this place be preserved, or would it need a full reconstruction? The Coakley School, it is an incredibly sensitive building, and it is perhaps the most problematic of a number of schools included in an inventory done in 2007. A different eye might decide that it has lost too much of its original material to be eligible for the National Register. However, it should be assessed in light of other schools documented in that report and probably other reports. And with that said, the time has now come to move on. Oh, but wait. Remember this little building discussed earlier? You know, the Coakley store. Well, here is its Facebook page. And as you can see, things do go on in this store today. It is open here and there, appearing to cater heavily to indoor yard sales. And now we can move on